Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Orr, and I'm the Executive Director of the UK and Ireland Spill Association. And we're going to start a series of two conversational webinars. And for this, I'm joined by Dr. John Burton from Oracle Environmental, Adrian Brennock, unfortunately not a doctor,
Nope.
a very bright lad who's from ASP Environmental, and a very bright lady called Amy Perrett-Croce from Socotec. And the subject that we're going to cover is red tape versus response time. As I say, there's going to be two webinars, and this first one is all about looking at some incidents which occurred in England, which Dr. John Burton is going to take us through. So without further ado, John, go for it.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's much appreciated. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Amy for hosting, of course, and to Adrian for being the technical wizard. Hopefully it's all working well.
We're trying. We'll see.
Look at all this kit. We've upgraded from the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pleasure to have you all here at Socotec.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
In the beautiful sunshine of Burton-on-Trent.
It's nice when the sun's shining. The world is better. So yeah.
Indeed.
So the presentation that I've put together today, it's really put together to highlight the issues that are faced by spill contractors working in the response industry, and to highlight the issues surrounding permitting and consents in relation to the installation of remediation systems and their operation as well. So we just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we faced over the years and that still remain, although I am aware that the regulators are also looking into changing some of these aspects as well. So there is some positive
So it's
news
really constructive observation, isn't it?
I'd like to think so. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Absolutely. It's positive. We're all trying to share real life experience.
Yeah. It's that continual improvement, isn't it?
Absolutely. We should all be striving for that.
So in this webinar, this is the first one of two. We wanted to set the scene. So we've put together three different spill incidents that we've dealt with in England in the recent past, and the second webinar, which will present at a later date, details how we've then actually sort of navigated our way through the permitting process and how we've basically carried out the installation of systems on different sites to deal with spill incidents. So overall, between the two webinars, we wanted to highlight the issues that I've indicated here on this slide. So just to detail some of the challenges faced as a result of permitting and consent requirements.
I guess, John, these ones that you're going to talk about, they seem kind of fairly common, scenario, in a sense, common type of fuel, common scenario, shallow groundwater.
Yeah, there's definitely some commonalities between them. I think they're all different fuel types themselves, but it's a fairly sizable amount of fuel that's been released in each scenario. It's fairly shallow groundwater, and therefore that fuel is easily recoverable. So why wouldn't you try and recover as much of that as quickly as possible?
That's the key, isn't it? As quickly as possible.
So we wanted to highlight some of the inconsistencies kind of in the approach across the country as well. The costs involved in the permitting process and the associated time delays. Those are the key kind of things, particularly from client's point of view as well, is what's the cost going to be and what's the time taken in actually dealing with that particular site.
Yeah.
So and then I did want to end on a positive note with some hope for the future in terms of what the regulators are currently looking at in terms of making changes to the permitting process as well.
Always good to end on a positive note.
Absolutely, I think it should. Yeah. So, as I've said, the first webinar is about sort of setting the scene for these these three spill incidents, and as we've said, they're all in England. So obviously there's different permitting regimes in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But we do have many sort of other examples that aren't talked about today, but we just thought we'd illustrate some of the key issues that we faced on dealing with these incidents in England. So the first incident that we're going to talk about, this was a spill that we dealt with last year. So it was a spill of 1,500 litres of red diesel, and it occurred on a site that was owned by Portsmouth Water. So it's a water supply site. The spill itself was a result of an overfill incident on the day tank on the standby generator, and these are common setups for sites like this and others as well. So places like hospitals. Lots of these sites have sort of standby generators that kick in if there's a power cut. So the problem being that you need to make sure that things are maintained on a regular basis as well. So this particular incident, as I say, 1,500 litres lost to ground from the standby generator. Highly sensitive site in terms of it being a water supply site. It wasn't as sensitive in terms of its environmental sensitivity. The reason for that being that it's on London clay. There's about 50 metres of London clay overlying the chalk. So you've got a chalk aquifer at depth, but this wasn't abstracting. This was a site that was essentially bringing the drinking water in and pumping it out to properties in the region as well. So the site's not in a source protection zone either, and there's no obstructions or surface watercourses within 1 kilometre of the site. So the key risk driver here was actually the risk to services. So obviously we want to make sure that there's no contamination of those services as a result of the incident.
Yeah.
So what did the response look like? So we attended site same day of the instruction, 10th of Jan 24. It was pretty dark, as you can see in the photo here. So we were working kind of alongside the contractors that had been appointed by Portsmouth Water, and essentially focusing on obviously mopping up any diesel that we could around the spill source, and then focusing on source excavation and breaking pathways. So actually getting interception trenches in the ground and removing as much diesel as quickly as we can. So
That's a lot of diesel.
I mean, we've dealt with bigger, and I'm sure Adrian has too. But it's big enough, and because the site is so sensitive, it's a real issue, and you need to get rid of that diesel as quickly as possible.
And I guess because it's the London clay, it's going to be contained probably a lot in those surfaces. So it's just running away.
That's exactly it. And that's on that particular point. You know, the approach has to be breaking that pathway, getting interception trenches in, getting sumps in, so that you can actually start recovering that diesel as quickly as possible. So we did pretty well in the early stages. So 630 litres of diesel actually recovered from direct pumping from trial pits and interception trenches while we're carrying out that work. And obviously, as you're uncovering that diesel and breaking those pathways, we're installing sumps that allow us to then carry on.
Go back into it more.
Exactly. So it allows us to then recover diesel and diesel contaminated groundwater as well. So after that, the first few days, we're left with 770 litres of diesel unaccounted for. So this is just an example of what it looked like. So as Adrian, you point out, there's fast pathways. You've got a really firm clay surrounding these services that have got shingle backfill basically along the services, and it's just going to shoot.
Lovely pathway.
Exactly. And for anyone that kind of knows these kind of sites, they're very challenging in terms of the services that you're encountering. You've got a whole array of services, many of which aren't on any plans. So you've got to excavate very carefully, and they're also really critical services, so you can't break through any of them. So it's almost an archaeological dig, but you're trying to get things done really quickly.
And you're under the pressure of time all the time.
Absolutely.
You have to, there's a real fine balance to strike, isn't there? These are things.
Also, I wanted to ask, did it help that it was a clay matrix? Because from speaking to responders, they seem to say...
I mean, it yes and no, I suppose. I think yes, in terms of there's no wider migration. You haven't really got a kind of wide plume of diesel on this particular site. It is contained, as Adrian says, within those kind of service runs. And the other issue you've got here, as with many other sites like this, you've got these services, some of which are at 0.5 metres, some of which are at 3.5 metres, and they're all crisscrossing, and you've got numerous directions in which the diesel can travel. So you've got to make sure your interception trenches are actually kind of intersecting all of those, so that you are cutting off all of those pathways. So
And
that's
potential redundant ones as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't even know about them.
absolutely,
Can't trace.
yep,
So-
yep, absolutely. So
Look very sunny here, by the way.
It does.
yeah, there were a few days of sunshine.
Yeah, so you didn't have too much rainfall causing other issues.
Not at that stage. Certainly at a later stage, we saw rainfall have a dramatic effect in terms of the sort of shallow groundwater levels, and the amount of pumping that was needed to kind of manage those levels as well.
Yeah, because that can often be the challenge, is to take advantage of the weather as well, to get in there and get as much as possible before the downpours come in.
Well,
And
the
so-
inevitable downpour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and becomes a completely different challenge.
Exactly. So this is another example of what we sort of came across. So we've got diesel tracking along the shingle around the surfaces, and you've got it sort of accumulating in various chambers on the site as well. So we're tasked with obviously recovering as much diesel as quickly as possible. So we're pumping out from these chambers that you can access, and installing sumps adjacent to these chambers, so that we can actually stop the contamination from getting into them in the first place. So yeah, as we sort of touched on, that clearly a need to start removing that diesel as quickly as possible, and as you can see, lots of it still sort of at shallow depth as we're excavating those trial pits and trenches. So in order to do that recovery, we recommended installation of a treatment system at an early stage, and these were the kind of key constraints that we had on the site. So there was no foul sewer on this site, which was in a fairly rural location. The nearest, I think, access point to a sewer was about 230 metres away from where we needed to put the system, and it was on the opposite side of an A road as well. So another constraint was to essentially have 24/7 pumping to gain control of the diesel and to stop it migrating around the site and also off-site as well. So we wanted to prevent that off-site migration. So as I said before, there's no surface waters or groundwater abstractions in the area, so there's a kind of low environmental sensitivity as such. And there was lots of land available as well to allow us to kind of discharge to. Given the sensitivity of the site as well, as you can imagine, the kind of remedial targets that we're working to are going to be pretty stringent. So we're looking at trying to get rid of as much of the diesel as possible, and ideally getting it to a non-detectable level if we can within that shallow groundwater in time.
And is that a limit you set, or was that a limit that the client set?
It was a limit that was discussed with the client and the regulators as well. So obviously your first goal, as Adrian will know, in dealing with any of these instances, is to get rid of as much of that free phase contamination as you can, and then it's looking at what's realistically achievable to try and restore the site to its pre-spill condition if you can.
Okay.
So that's the first one. So second example is slightly different. It's a commercial site, and we basically got called to this site after an incident that occurred back in June 2024. So this one was a below ground hydraulic hose that was delivering engine oil. That was coming from a nearby storage tank, and that was found to be leaking. The estimated volume of engine oil that had been lost was again around sort of 1,500 litres, and I'm not entirely sure of the accuracy involved in the estimate, but that's certainly the figure that was sort of put forward initially. But as with many of these incidents, you don't get a sort of exact number on day one.
No.
And you live and learn as you start sort of breaking ground and operating these systems.
It seems to be larger than what we're thinking.
Yes, it often is.
Yeah, was it a pressurized line or was it gravity?
I think it was a pressurised line, yeah. So the potential there is for sort of further loss. Yeah. So our client on this one was Trinity Environmental, another UK Spill member.
Yeah.
And they attended site in October 24 after sort of getting all the approvals in place and the instructions through. So they carried out emergency sort of mitigation works at that time, which involved again kind of source excavation and investigation works as well. So they carried out obviously pumping what they found at the time as well. So they were recovering the free phase engine oil that was identified on shallow groundwater, and they installed recovery sumps again to enable the kind of ongoing recovery of that engine oil once that initial kind of excavation phase has been carried out. And it was believed at that time, I think, that a large proportion of the free product that had been lost had been recovered.
Right. Okay.
In that picture,
Yep.
it doesn't look like engine oil.
No? Why do you say that?
It looks very, very like diesel.
There's a nice sheen on it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But,
I think I'd have to get Amy in on that one and ask her to analyse the sample.
That's a good idea on it.
No, I think as with many of these sites that we deal with, you do get discoloration of the product depending on what it comes into contact with, and obviously as it weathers over time as well, you get a sort of change in coloration as well. But no, the analysis that we had done only showed that there was only engine oil present.
Good.
Oh, can I ask a question? So, you know, when you have the spills with different kinds of fuels, like you had the diesel and then the engine oil, is one easier to clean up than the other?
It's a good question. I think they all present kind of different risks. Diesel, for example, is going to be comprised of compounds that are potentially more mobile and more toxic to some degree. So, and again, kerosene is a lighter fuel again, which contains more BTEX compounds. So, and they can be more toxic, and some of which have been classified as carcinogenic as well. So they do present different risks, and they do migrate in the environment to a different degree as well. So the lighter fuels will tend to migrate further quicker, but on the plus side, they do degrade more quickly as well. So you tend to see those lighter fuels kind of degrading.
So, like if you had a petrol leak, a lot would be lost through the air anyways with volatilization.
Yeah, absolutely. But it obviously presents a greater risk in the kind of early stages of that incident, because of the kind of toxicity associated with the kind of lighter components as well. The engine oils, as in this scenario, they're heavier end hydrocarbons, and they tend to be mainly composed of kind of the aliphatic hydrocarbons as well. So they don't really pose that much of a risk in terms of kind of the health risks. They're not sort of
not so many aromatic
exactly.
groups.
You're not looking at lots of pH compounds, for example. You're looking at these kind of aliphatic compounds that will bind quite strongly to organic soils and to clay soils as well, so they don't travel as far as the lighter fuels like kerosene and diesel as well.
That's interesting.
And I think the other thing with automotive fuels, because I know gearbox oil, for instance, is actually not really, quite often not an actual hydrocarbon oil anymore, and so it's so stable in the environment. It does, and it's designed to basically have high temperatures and cold temperatures in gearboxes, so it's designed to be really stable.
So does it just sit there?
And so so I've been involved in projects where it's been there for 20 years and it's almost like it's gone straight in there. And it's the risk, it's completely different way that it behaves than in the environment, which is quite interesting.
Because it won't move around; it just stays where it is.
Well, it depends on the geology and everything else, but
and the accessibility to a pathway, which is easy to travel. But it isn't going to try. It's not. It does tend to just stay where it is, because of the nature of the product and its viscosity as well.
So it's got gravity affecting it, but other than that, unless there's pathways or the geology is preferential or whatever, it's but in terms of its ability to degrade, as we would with risk assessments and saying, right, this will degrade at this rate and that hydrocarbon band will degrade at that rate and everything else, you can't really take certain oils like that which are fully manufactured, you can't really take that approach to. So it's quite
and the real fun starts on these sites where you've got kind of two fuel types mingling together. So for example, if on this site we had got a kerosene or a diesel as well as the engine oil, what you can actually see is that the lighter fuels act as a solvent, and they're essentially washing out the contamination associated with the heavier hydrocarbons. So you get this kind of co-mingling of hydrocarbons, which is caused by the lighter fuels just acting as a solvent.
So when you go back to these nice big manufacturing sites that have been there for 100+ years, then the potential that you've got historic bits
Yeah.
of contamination in the ground, and you get this new spill that then can pull all of that
Yeah.
out.
And maybe
Complicated.
mobilize
Yeah,
contaminants which have been there for
and which
decades.
doing no harm,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden,
Yeah, they
Yeah.
just needed that kick.
Yep.
Analysis is key.
Yes.
Isn't that right, Amy?
That's true.
Did I say the right thing there?
Well done.
Analysis is key.
No, it is key, to be honest, and it comes back to what the client should be paying for as well.
Absolutely.
You know, our clients, similar to Adrian, a lot of the time it's in relation to the insurance industry. So it's a specific incident that's occurred, and they're only there to really clean up that incident. So you shouldn't really be dealing with any historic contamination that isn't part of that insurance claim.
But I guess if there's
Goes to
historic,
consequential loss, this array, it brings that into question, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how much you can get the original spill to deal with the consequences of that loss.
Yeah, I mean,
A very difficult point.
it is a difficult point, but we regularly get asked, you know, how old is this fuel? You know, can you age the
And you
contamination
do
in
the
the
age
ground?
analysis, yeah.
But it's fraught with error as well.
it is, because that's based on the microenvironment as well. But I guess you need to know, is it fresh spill or a historic spill?
Exactly. Yeah.
sometimes it can be 6 months before we get called in.
Yeah.
That becomes pretty tricky.
Or
then.
you've had
Yeah.
a slow leak that's been going on for a while. You've got a little bit of, it's been
Yeah.
ongoing. So, hugely interesting. Anyway.
You
Sorry,
digress.
we digress.
Yeah,
sorry,
digress.
That's all good, it's all good.
Back on topic, but it's a
So-
useful conversation to have.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So this particular site, the sensitivity in terms of environmental sensitivity, I would say, was sort of moderate to low. We had superficial deposits of head, which was a combination of clays, sands, and gravels, and the solid geology beneath the site was the Wadhurst Clay Formation, which is a mudstone. Albeit the Wadhurst Clay was classified as a secondary A aquifer, but the site wasn't in a groundwater source protection zone. The key kind of environmental risk driver was a drainage channel, which was located on the site boundary on this one. So, free-phase engine oil on shallow groundwater. Again, as with the sort of first example, you've got the potential for migration around surfaces. And, as an industrial or commercial site, there's a wide range of services, again, that are crossing the site. So you can see them sort of exposed here, crisscrossing the excavation that act as potential pathways. So
Did the site have good drawings? Because it looks like a reasonably modern site.
It was better than some, I would say. Yeah, absolutely. So, but there's always the need to progress carefully.
Of course, always.
Sites and, carry out a decent kind of survey prior to sort of breaking ground. Really, that's always a key element of any kind of investigation work as well. I mean, not only does it sort of protect everyone who's actually carrying out the work, it informs potential pathways as well. So, free-phase engine oil on shallow groundwater again, likely to migrate around surfaces. Clearly need to get the free-phase engine oil removed as quickly as we can. And so we recommended installation of a treatment system. So that was going to sort of remove the free phase and stop any off-site migration as well. So the key constraints on this particular site then, it was a working commercial site. So we had numerous kind of buildings surrounding the affected area, and they were still wanted to remain in operation. There was concrete hard standing across the majority of the outside areas. There was a foul sewer present on this site, so we had to look at sort of potential for discharge to foul sewer as well. The nearest watercourse was on the site boundary, as I've talked about, and the nearest abstraction, which wasn't really at risk, was 800 metres from the site as well. So our initial goal was to remove as much of that free-phase engine oil as possible, and then we'll assess the risk associated with any residual contamination, given the fact that it's a working industrial site as well. So we'd expect the sort of remedial targets to be somewhat lower than, say, the first example, which was a completely sort of different level of sensitivity involved.
Yeah.
So lastly then, the last example is a spill that occurred back in October 24, and this was again 1,500 litres of kerosene this time.
Oh, kerosene was
Does
like
your
kerosene.
calculator only go to 1,500?
It does look.
I mean, it does seem coincidental.
No, it does. It does. There's nothing deliberate involved.
I'm sure. I'm only teasing. I'm only teasing.
Yeah.
So this one was from a failed compression fitting on an oil supply line to a domestic property.
So was it on a line then, not the actual?
Yeah,
Ah.
not on the tank. This was on the line there, so you can see it on the
Yeah.
photo in the top left there. Really common sort of scenario. We see it on a regular basis. It's just fairly flimsy oil feed lines connected to thousands of litres of kerosene, and yeah, it's still.
It emphasises, and I get a lot of calls from homeowners who the tank's fine, but they've got this fuel in the garden, and I say, when is the last time you inspected your tank? And I keep stressing to them, you've got to go and do a walk round at least once a week. Try and go round, just check everything's all right. Can you smell anything? Is there any stained grass? Is there any stained vegetation?
Yeah,
I know I keep preaching that, but I know some people do. Probably 3 of us here all do, because we all live in rural locations, and we see it every week. All I'd say is, anyone listening, if you've got a tank in your garden, go and do a walkover. Just walk the course of where the line goes. It's it will save you so much.
But I think and I don't know whether we're seeing more and more lines going.
Less the tanks,
Less
more the
the
lines.
Yeah.
The tank's been replaced maybe twice, 3 times, but the line's now
Has never been
40,
replaced.
60,
Yeah.
80 years old.
Yeah.
And that one,
Yeah.
it's proper
Well,
old school.
you can see the degradation on that line
Yeah.
there. So it's a copper line, and where it's bare copper,
Yeah.
you start to see the verdigris
Yeah.
sort of appearing there, and you know that corrosion is going to be an issue at some point on the
Yeah.
future as well. So if the
is.
fitting hadn't gone, then,
Yeah.
then the
And
lines
that
would probably have corroded as well.
at some point.
And all we can say is, which is what I do when I say, if we replace a tank after a leak or whatever, is, I would replace the line.
Replace the line.
Because it's at least as old as the previous tank.
Yeah.
And so I would replace the line as well. But most people don't want to do it.
But actually, old lines can be really hard, because at some point there's been works on the house, there's been an extension added, it's buried in concrete, and very difficult. Very difficult.
I don't
But
know, you mentioned the kind of variety of causes of spills never ceases to amaze me, and all the way through from children kind of playing next to an oil feed line and hitting it, to rats chewing through certain lines, cattle, just many and varied these incidents.
Well, that was the one that immediately jumped to my mind when you said about extending over, was these couple had moved from London to Norfolk, and he was putting on some new skirting boards, and he literally, in the middle of the house, and he basically he was just hammering in nails.
Oh.
A bit of a bodger. And he just he put 2 nails through the oil line.
that was a good shot.
Yeah, it was a good shot.
Good
Twice.
shot. Twice.
So basically came down the next morning and there's just oil pouring out the side of the
gosh.
What? It's such a,
But I've
and it's
seen
such
it in
a, it's such a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's such a tragedy.
Just garden forks going.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's in the garden. That's the common cause. People don't know where the line goes.
Yeah.
And there's no marker for it.
No.
And they're actually busy. And you get a contractor in who's doing some work. He doesn't know where the line is.
Yeah.
And you haven't told him.
Yeah.
That's why you should trace the service before you
Well,
start.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was another digression. It's a useful one. Sorry, John. I'm gonna zip it
No,
now.
don't. No, it's good.
No, it's good.
So this was quite a significant amount of impact
Yeah.
actually associated with this one, and so the photos don't show it particularly well, but actually bottom left and bottom right and top right there is water response, because we had free phase kerosene on the sort of fairly sizable ponds on this particular property as well, and there's water courses sort of connecting the various ponds as well.
There weren't any koi carp in this. I know we covered koi carp a lot recently.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No. There might be the odd newt.
Okay.
But no koi carp.
No dead fish.
No, I don't think we did find anything. So
I'm
we managed to
relieved.
get it
That's
quite
good.
quickly.
I'm relieved.
Yeah.
We're relieved.
Yeah.
Good. So clearly, emergency works needed to try and get that situation under control. We've sort of got rid of the free phase on the watercourses there and contained it, but we want to stop that kerosene getting to those watercourses as well. So the added sort of fun and games here was finding free phase kerosene in the sewage treatment plant. So again, because this is a rural property, no foul sewer nearby, so it's got its own sewage treatment plant. And the top photo in the top left there shows you the free phase contamination that's from the sewage treatment plant. So we had to get that pumped out. And in fact, we had to sort of keep that going to manage the situation as well, to stop it getting into the sewage treatment plant, and then obviously to stop it discharging at the other end of the sewage treatment plant as well. So emergency excavation works sort of carried out as well, and we identified some extensive kerosene contamination on shallow groundwater again there. So you can see in that photos on the bottom two there, that's the kind of pure kerosene that we were picking up really quickly. So that was in close proximity to the broken fitting there.
And that right close to the house as well.
Exactly.
Real worry.
So
Quite a relatively old property, or
so Cotswold stone property.
Okay.
Not much in the way of foundations. So always a challenge.
Potential for migration underneath it.
And were the homeowners still living in there?
They were obviously when it happened, but because of the vapours, they had to.
Yeah.
So the added sort of sensitivity here as well is that there's a triple SI, so a site of special scientific interest, literally next door to the property as well.
Wow.
And that was very much a kind of water-based triple SI, so we had to prevent any migration of the kerosene onto that triple SI site as well. So emergency excavation works carried out to essentially chase out the contamination along any drainage routes and to allow installation of recovery sumps again to enable us to start pumping the contamination as quickly as possible.
In terms of timescale, how quick, roughly, approximately, to getting these sumps in and to be able to start recovery? Because you are doing a bit of you're exploring, you're finding your way, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on a good point because I've got it in my notes here. As with
Well done.
nearly all of these incidents where you're doing emergency response works of the nature that we sort of talked about here, you're not only doing response, you're doing investigation work as well. So it's combining your remediation and investigation is key. So in terms of timescales, I mean, obviously we're on site day one, if possible, if it's all possible, and we're starting works, if not day one, day two. And we're recovering directly from trial pits and also getting those sumps installed as quickly as possible.
And then continuing to investigate and explore.
Exactly.
It never really stops, does it, in these spills?
Well, it doesn't
You keep but you keep looking until you're confident that you've actually captured the bloom and you've got the ability to recover it. Otherwise,
absolutely.
It just runs away.
But that's where the installation of the systems that I'll be talking about in a bit more detail in the next webinar, that's really where they really come into their own. Because if you can get onto site with a system, then you can get 24/7 control of a plume, and that's exactly what you need. And you can start recovering and removing that fuel from the ground.
And taking the risk. Just risk management, risk mitigation.
So we carried out emergency excavation works on this one, installed sumps again, and as you touched on before, we investigated soils beneath the property there. You can see a hand auger being progressed underneath the foundations, and lo and behold, you got kerosene contamination under the property as well. So something needs to be done in that respect as well.
How sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Major work involved. So sensitivity then, touched on it already, but site itself is underlain by alluvium of the Northmoor sand and gravel member, and it was classified by the EA as a secondary A aquifer itself. The bedrock geology, not as sensitive, that's mudstone, so you've basically got gravels overlying the mudstone there. And those gravels, you can get some really rapid transport through those gravels, as you can imagine. So again, the emphasis is on getting that control so that you stop it getting through those gravels into watercourses and out to the triple SI. It was in a groundwater source protection zone, but it was a source protection zone 2C, which they're not as common as many others. But that's where you've got a aquifer at depth that's basically being abstracted from. So it's not directly at risk from contamination in the shallow geology. So that's subsurface activity only, that one. And the triple SI 150 meters to the west of the site with direct sort of hydraulic connection between the two as well.
Right.
We sort of touched on this earlier. I think we mentioned rainfall. So rainfall can affect these sites massively. So these sort of watercourses here, particularly the one at the bottom, was kind of maybe ankle height, just above ankle height when we first attended, and then after some significant rainfall, suddenly it's sort of waist deep. So you need to ensure that whatever response measures you put in place can adjust for that kind of scenario. So make sure you've got your kind of booms and things on compensators so that they can rise and fall with any kind of changes in water level and that sort of thing as well. So we needed to remove sort of free phase contamination as quickly as possible, as with all these incidents. So again, recommending installation of a treatment system quickly to allow us to recover that kerosene as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Key constraints on this site then, no foul sewer in this rural location. So there's got to be another way in terms of arranging that discharge. So we needed to commence recovery as quickly as possible to get control of that kerosene plume. In doing that, you're actually preventing impact to the house, you're preventing impact to the sewage treatment plant, you're preventing impact to the watercourses. So it's a win-win-win. And obviously preventing the risk to the triple SI. So the initial kind of target for cleanup works was recovering that free phase contamination. And then ultimately, the works are actually still ongoing, so we'll assess kind of the ongoing risk associated with any dissolved phase to those receptors, such as the house, human health, and the environmental receptors as well. So that's the three sites in terms of sort of setting the scene. So a quick summary slide here. And yes, you're right, 1,500 litres on all of them.
Consistent.
Very consistent.
Really?
It's happened.
Okay.
So there are some common themes as we've touched on among all three sites. So you've got free phase contamination, engine oil, diesel, kerosene on shallow groundwater, and because of that, it's relatively easily recoverable. So whenever I see pictures like I've shown here of sort of kerosene, pure kerosene in a hole, I'm thinking, we've really got to start getting that out as quickly as possible. So that's essentially our goal then, is to get a system onto these sites to get that contamination under control and to start remediating as quickly as possible. And that's going to be the subject of the next webinar in terms of how
and in that webinar, can you explain you're going to explain the components within a remediation system, just for those who don't understand them?
It's going to be touched on. I mean, it's not something that's sort of in
because some people, it's very easy to say, we're going to put a remediation system in.
Yes,
but actually, it'd be good to know what the components are.
Absolutely, we can certainly cover that. I mean, the real focus is on basically how the regulators have approached kind of the clean-up in terms of allowing us to carry out those works, and with the emphasis being trying to show the kind of pressures in terms of timescale and cost that come with trying to install systems like what we're talking about.
But I think it's, as you say, when you look at those excavations and you've got free oil just sitting there, right? Everybody from regulators to the homeowner to the insurer is looking at going, we just need to get that out.
Absolutely.
Now.
Yeah.
Why are we not doing it right now?
Yeah, and without doubt, there'll be people saying, well, why don't you just get a vacuum tanker in there? Why don't you start pumping it to temporary containment? And absolutely, that does usually form part of that process as well. But what that doesn't give you is that 24/7 control and continued kind of recovery and remediation of a site.
Yeah, because actually, You can't have tankers on stream lined up down the road just so you can suck out.
I've seen it before.
I've had 15 tankers.
But it's certainly not the most cost effective. It's certainly not the most sustainable.
No, it's not. It's not.
And you have to consider these things when
Yeah.
dealing with these kind of incidents as well.
And equally in rural environments as well like this, how far does a tanker has to travel?
Absolutely.
How many tankers are you going to need? Because we've got a similar sort of, it's artesian, and all of a sudden, we've got to do this excavation. And similar challenges. So,
The other thing to consider is that tankers, I'm not picking on them deliberately, but they can make a situation worse as well.
Oh.
So, years ago I dealt with a big spill. I think that was about 18,000 litres of diesel.
Yeah.
So not 1,500.
Different number.
That was on an industrial site, and the diesel got into a really large balancing pond on this industrial site, and the regulator basically attended that particular site and said, right, you need to pump this balancing pond out and remove all the diesel that you can, just to empty the balancing pond. And the result of that was that they basically got tankers on turnaround and emptied it, but that in doing so they smeared the side of this balancing pond and then contaminated all of the silts contained in the bottom of the balancing pond as well.
Yeah.
And whereas what you probably would have been better off doing is getting a set of skimmers and just
using
focusing on that
absolutely.
free phase and removing that free phase. So again, just think sort of intelligently about it. And that particular job, they spent something like £300,000 in 2 weeks on tankering alone.
Yeah. And it sounds like a simple solution, but it's the golden rule: don't make it worse.
Don't make it worse.
I always think of the consequences of what you're doing. There will be a knock on to. It's that options appraisal, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's a really interesting kind of concept. Don't make it worse, because I think that's almost where the regulators are coming from in terms of their permitting. Because, we're taking pure fuel out of the ground and talking about putting drinking water, quality water back to ground in some scenarios. So how can that ever be deemed to be making it worse? That's what we'll touch on in the next webinar.
Yeah, can't wait.
That's good.
Sounds good.
Gripping.
Good stuff.
Thank you very much, John. That is great.
You, John.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed for that. Amy, thank you very much for chipping in. It's a great start.
Yes.
I can't wait to do part 2.
Excellent.
When do we get to that? Follow us. We will, if you've registered for this, we'll be emailing you to let you know when part 2 is on. And otherwise, we'll also be promoting it through social media, and you'll see information on the website. It's been great to have you all here and to pick our brains and to discuss what you've been doing. We hope you like these conversational webinars. Do give us feedback, and I hope that you can pick out a few lessons from them. And if you have an oil tank in your garden, please take this opportunity when it is daylight to go and have a look at it and give it a hug. Right, now time for questions. Adrian, Amy and John are online, so if anybody has questions, now's your time to ask.
Hi, Anthony Futige is my name. I'm the senior environmental scientist. Hi, Amy. I'm a senior environmental scientist to Thrive Science Limited. Spillage, contaminated land has been my specialty. So thank you for that presentation. I was just wondering, the remediation target was just to scoop the free phase oil. Was there any intrusive, more detailed remediation target with respect to line of evidence to show that the contaminants were within acceptable levels?
John, would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah. I think the answer to that is that they're all kind of live incidents still. So, and in fact, the first example that I showed there, we have put forward a proposal for using bioremediation in situ, and we're actually waiting for kind of feedback from the client to see if they would like to implement that. And that's particularly with the first incident, as I mentioned in the webinar, there's going to be some stringent cleanup criteria. So there is going to be something else that needs to be done in terms of polishing and treatment of the dissolve phase. So in situ bio was deemed to be kind of the most acceptable solution, because things like chemical oxidation could affect the surfaces. So, you've got a combination of steel pipes, plastic pipes, and various kind of flanges and fittings and things which could be affected by things like peroxide or other kind of oxidants. So in that particular one, we have proposed sort of further polishing. The other two are kind of still too fresh, so to speak. But I would expect that the third one, on the domestic property, I expect there will be a need for some further polishing and some lower kind of targets, again, because of the triple SI. The second example, because it's on a working industrial site, I'm not so sure that there'll be a need for that further kind of polishing step. So spill 1 and spill 3, I think there will be a need for further polishing, but not so much spill 2.
Great, thank you, John. I've had a question from, I think it's Manjit. General question about costs. Who pays for the remediation? Is it insurers, owners, loss adjusters? And the other second part of the question is, roughly how long does it take? How long do these cleanup episodes take? John or Adrian, do you want to pick that one up? In fact, Adrian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, normally it's insurers that are covering it from our perspective. And I would say anywhere from 6 months to 18 months on average, and then extending on from that, really, depending on how serious the incident is.
Yes, it's very rare for a job to be, go there, clean up, and you're out, because you always want to make sure you've taken away the contamination that's occurred and restored the property to the condition that is acceptable from a health point of view and an environmental point of view.
Every site is different, and every site's got its own challenges. In terms of who pays, I mean, the examples that I've given there, Spill 2 and Spill 3 were insurers, as Adrian says. Spill 1, because in that incident it was a water company, and some of the larger companies are self-insured. So, in fact, it was Portsmouth Water that paid for that directly themselves. And in terms of timescale, I mean, we'll sort of learn a bit more in the next webinar, but essentially, Spill 1, we managed to remove the free phase from site completely within about 12 months, but there will be some further treatment required, as I mentioned before. But because of the different kind of challenges and risks presented by these different sites, the timescales can be many and varied. I mean, some of the longest spills that I've dealt with in my career have gone on for 11 years, and that again is on more sensitive water supply sites, for example, where they've had a spill, but they have got abstraction boreholes that are supplying hundreds of thousands of people. So, that it really is sort of varied and depends on the risks presented by each spill.
Yeah, a point here from Sean McDonald is it possible to flush the flow route with kerosene along the service ducts with a remediation agent and water? Would this be able to push the kerosene through whilst also starting to remediate at the same time?
I think yes is the quick answer, but it needs to be kind of carefully managed in that I'd still want to remove kind of the free phase as much as possible. Basically, you can then use, particularly in the scenario for the Spill 1, where you've got sort of clay soils and you've got a fast channel of sort of migration around the shingle and through the shingle, then yes, you can flush it from one kind of location to another. And that's often something we do, is to kind of flush it and recover it from down gradient. So that certainly can be considered.
Yeah, I think it's a tool in your armory, isn't it? And it depends upon in a sense, the net environmental benefit of each option that you choose. And there's one in here which is from Gardner Hunt. There is a clear theme across all 3 sites, being there is no foul sewer on site. Is this something that is being addressed at new sites? And can a lesson be taken from these examples and applied to future projects when handling sensitive material at a standalone site? I wouldn't really class fuel as being a sensitive material. It's a sort of commonly used material. Hydrocarbon fuel is a commonly used material at most sites. And the proximity of an older house, particularly an older property, to a foul sewer, if it's rural area, it's unlikely there's a foul sewer. But like the industrial estate, I guess there would have been one nearby. It's all, in a sense, the Portsmouth Water site is also really in a rural area, isn't it?
Yeah, so it is in a rural area, and there was a foul sewer in the road. It just happened to be about 230 metres away from where we wanted to put our system, or where we were able to put it. Second spill scenario did have a foul sewer, so that is something that I'll talk about in the next one, in terms of arranging kind of discharge to that foul sewer as well. But it just so happens that a lot of the incidents we do deal with are typically in kind of rural settings where there's just no way to have a foul sewer or a mains foul sewer available.
Yeah, great. On any more questions out there?
Just a
Thank
quick
you.
one. I was wondering what's the capacity of your spill response? Because I've been involved in spill response that it's quite for massive oil spillage in the Niger Delta, and I want to know what your capacity is with respect to spill responses.
I think we get involved. I'll start with this, but all I'd say is that in the UK, we do get involved in very large spills, train derailments, big industrial accidents, marine accidents. There, within the UK, there is a lot of capability, and I would say we have sufficient capability, particularly as many members of the association or our accredited body, International Spill Accreditation Scheme, will combine resources to ensure that a spill of national significance can be done, or regional significance can be cleaned up well, efficiently, and in the very best way. So within the nation, we have considerable capability. I think talking about the type of spills you've had in Nigeria, particularly in the Ogoniland, of which a number of us are aware. I mean, these are different levels, different scales. And the way that they seem to have been dealt with is through parcels of work related to parcels of severely contaminated area. They're a different issue altogether. What we are seeing is that where there are significantly large spills, there are tools, there are capabilities to enable them to be dealt with. And we're seeing significant cleanups in Iraq, which are, acres and acres of spilled area being effectively processed and therefore treated and remediated in one go. So there is capability in this UK environment. Many of the spills are smaller spills of the type that John has described. Some rural, some will be commercial, some will be industrial spills, but we do in this country get some very significant spills. There's been one going on relatively recently. Over 350,000 litres of spilt fuel was cleaned up in the derailment, and the environment is recovering well. So it depends, but we have the capability and we have the knowledge.
I mean, it's an interesting question, Anthony. We have been sort of speaking to people about using our treatment systems to remediate certain sections in Niger Delta as well. So yeah, maybe we'll have a discussion sort of separately about that, because it is something that I'm also working on sort of separately as well.
Okay.
I had a question, actually. It's going on from what Manjit asked as well earlier. So when you get to a spill site, do you actually have to give a timescale to the insurers? Because I've worked with various spill responders and the sites sometimes take ages. So I was wondering if that's something you guys have to give a ballpark figure to when you go to a site, to the insurers.
Thanks for that. I think it's normally the first question we get asked, I would say, is how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And it's a recurring question, comes up pretty much in every conversation subsequently. Yeah, it's the first question, I think.
And it's not an easy one to answer because, particularly at the start, I mean, there is a phase that you go through where you're Inspector Clouseau trying to actually piece all the bits of the problem together and trying to work out as best you can before you commit to your remediation options appraisal exactly what's there. And as you commence that remediation, you will inevitably find more pieces of the puzzle which compromises what you're eventually going to remediate. It is very difficult. But I mean, some spills are very straightforward. They're cleaned up really quickly. But others which you think are going to be simple at the start, as soon as you break ground, you realize that actually there's a lot more there than you thought initially. So you have to keep an open dialogue. And I don't think it's very unwise to commit to a cost and a time until you've got the full picture.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the key one is we try and do it so we highlight what assumptions we're making when we give those answers and really emphasize the data gaps. So it's what we don't know is almost more important than what we know in those early stages.
Great.
So I think Manjit asked again, generic source terms to model migration of chemicals through the rock strata, which will also aid in recovering timescales. Yes and no. I mean, I think it's often that we get asked to do kind of quantitative modelling, but it does happen, and the regulators will commonly ask for as much site-specific information as possible, and you're trying to carry out site investigation so that you can be confident about your conceptual model on the site, and then you're coupling that with the kind of analysis that Amy might provide to then kind of model your plume and to come up with your kind of cleanup targets as well. So it is something that we do get involved with on a few sites, but not many. I would say maybe 10%.
I would echo that, and I would say that quite often the quantitative modelling we do is more towards the end of the project to kind of support lines of evidence to say as to why it can be moved to a monitored natural attenuation, or essentially that we've done enough, or we've done all we can sustainably in that for that particular loss response, basically.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr. John Burton from Oracle Environmental, Adrian Brennock from ASP Environmental, and the lovely Amy Perec-Proce from Socotec. Thank you all for attending. We've been recording this as we've gone along, so this will be up within the next couple of days. And don't forget, if you've registered for this, you should be pre-registered for the second part of this series, which is 1 week today. So it's going to be at 1500 hours on Thursday, the 27th of March. Thanks very much for listening. The recordings of this will be up on the website in the next couple of days. So do look out for that. But thank you very much indeed. I hope that you like the conversation. Any feedback is welcome, and have a very good day. Bye-bye.